I want to talk about startups and trying to put that context into the corporate environment. I spent the last 9 years or so working with startups from an investment perspective, from a mentoring perspective in helping them build, and now inside a corporate. IAG is Australia's largest insurance company. It's the largest in New Zealand, has offices and joint ventures across Asia. It's a data-driven organisation and it's building out its data capability. And so my interest is bringing my work that I've done with data-based startups into the organisation. So what I wanted to do is just talk a little bit about sort of the corporate innovation space and then the angle that I'm coming at it from and trying to sort of change the way that this type of thing is done inside corporates. So these are the two questions I've kind of asked myself to set the context for the presentation. There's a lot of interest in corporates about the startup process at the moment. There's lots of people writing about the space, and anyone inside a corporate will have seen many variations on the types of programs that there are. And so I wanted to see, what does make a startup successful, and I'm not going to give you that in the next 15 minutes, but some of the characteristics around that, and then how do we look at that from a corporate lens? And effectively what I'm trying to do is to build startups inside the organisation. So that's really the way I'm coming at it. It's sort of the way that I understand the process. And so if I try and corrupt that with some of the other models, I don't think it would work as well. So that's what I want to explore. There are these two businesses are ones that I worked with in the past and currently continue to work with. So I want to try and weave those stories through the presentation to give some life to it. Hivery is a retail stock optimization product. Both of these businesses came out of Nicta, now Data61. So it's focused on optimizing the retail experience for a customer when they come into a store or stand in front of a vending machine. And Ambiata is a company that takes personal marketing on a mass scale using, both of them use machine learning, some focusing on analytics and the other focusing on the optimizing or optimization. Both have got corporate investors, both are data driven and both are having real impact. And I suppose the question I kind of asked myself was, why are these guys having impact with corporate data, with the data of their clients when the client couldn't have that same impact? So like I say, there's a lot said. I think in the innovation space, the prominence of Silicon Valley on the front page of many of our newspapers, the word innovation, the approach from government, and I wasn't here for the earlier this morning, but I'm sure there's this constant drive about the innovation agenda for Australia. If you're inside organisations, much is talked about disruption, much is talked about the change, the S&P 500 changing out, in what was long timeframes, decades, into much more constricted timeframes, and that will only speed up disruption inside the business from startups, from new technologies. And so that sort of drives us to look at opportunities to change the organisation. Anyone inside a big corporate, lean, agile, walls, lean business canvas, all the right buzzwords are there. Eric Rees and Steve Blank write a lot about this stuff. But a lot of it feels very top down to me, and I'm trying to see, can we prove out a model from bottom up and actually focusing on the startup and proving to the organisation that letting a business run is a much more effective way than trying to impose a program over the top. So I think one of the, and I put up this for a bit of fun, there's a phenomenon at the moment of ASX listed boards all heading to Silicon Valley and doing their tour. They go and see Andreessen Horowitz and Facebook and the big investors, the big companies, Google and the rest. And they come away saying we're going to be disrupted. We must put some sort of plan in place. And so there are lots of reasons why people do these types of things. I'm not from Google and or wherever else from Apple. But they still sort of celebrate the fact that actually finally we've got someone who's got some sort of startup focus inside the organisation. Lots of reasons for doing different types of initiatives, different types of programs. There are marketing ones, which are absolutely fine. There are true financial ones at the other end of it. But then there is, in the middle, product development, recruitment, and lots of other reasons to drive the innovation agenda inside an organisation. So this is a very simplistic model, but it's one that I've used as I sort of have worked with startups and with universities on on helping students think about how a startup works. And so I just take this lens as I apply it inside the corporate, just to give a structure to the talk. And I think environment changes. So on the highest level, environment is regulation and the things that are outside the control of the organisation. There's the organisation itself and what view it takes on innovation, and then there are programs that sit inside the organisation that drive the new product development. For me, the biggest thing is opportunity. Is there really a big problem to solve? Can an organisation, can a corporate organisation go about doing that effectively? Is there a team inside that will drive that? Is there some unique insight, some product that actually can solve that problem better than people outside of the organisation? There's there can be a tendency that if you're solving an internal problem that you only have one customer, so it's a much easier sell. To go outside the organisation is a much greater challenge. So what genuine insight is there that the team bring to the opportunity that they've found? And then how do you tie it together? And the business model is both the holistic structure of the business, the offering, but also for me, the funding model. Does it start generating revenue? Does it have to raise internal capital? Can it go out raise external capital? So to dig in some of those, there are constraints everywhere. For a startup, the constraints are how much money have I got? What's my runway? What my customers, my team, my stakeholders, my family, which is an unusual one, which is a common one. What are you doing with your life? When are you going to pay the rent? So there are certain pressures on a startup. In a corporate, they're often driven around KPIs and ROI and measures that are used in an established space. If you try and do something different inside an organisation, there are always going to be people who push back on it. So the antibodies form always around something that is disruptive to the organisation. And some of those disruptions are loss of jobs is a big one. So particularly in automation, the movement into robo-advice as an example in the financial services industry. It may be that it changes out technology platforms and the skills that are required move from the existing staff. And it may be that it's tied to people's incentives, their bonus plans. And a lot of those things are short-term revenue driven. So it's interesting to see what types of things pop up to slow down these types of initiatives. Over the last I've been at IAG about 12 weeks. So this is for me the start of the journey in experimental phase. I've come out of accelerators and incubators, so they're very formal models. An incubator is a long-term mentoring program. Accelerators, short and sharp, 12 weeks, get to a bigger pitch event. Everyone celebrates with the pitch and someone wins, and ideally you go raise some capital. And the reason I came into IAG was to try and build out to bring in some of those mechanisms into the business. But you have to be clear about what the objectives are for the organisation and how they best fit the type of program that you want to initiate. Accelerators are often very marketing driven. They take a very early idea and add a veneer to it, so it's a not quite so very early idea by the time it gets through, and and we'll then have to go out to raise money to actually build out what sits behind it. I had a Y Combinator company, the best known accelerator program in the US, pitched to us the other day on the phone, and he absolutely admitted that they have no technology and no particular insight apart from the experience of the team, and that was insurance experience, an understanding of tech, and trying to disrupt the world of insurance. And so it's a fascinating experiment, but way too early to be integrated into our business at this stage. And so some of these programs are fine to build up some early propositions, but we have to see them through to maturity. And ideally, you have this situation where the corporate is supportive of it. At our place at the moment, our CEO is incredibly customer-driven, data-driven, has an interest in the space, so we have a natural momentum. That's not always going to happen, so you somehow have to work out how you work. And staying under the radar is perfectly legitimate, and I think it's probably something as you build stripes and build experience, one of the ways of doing it within the system. The problem with a program is that the startup process is never a linear one, so you can't say that you go through these 5 stages and you do these 10 things that you'll get to success. What tends to happen is as people build those programs out, you're very successful at being part of the program. So you answer the 40 questions or the 150 questions, and you get to the end of it with not necessarily a proposition that resonates with customers that you can drive revenue and growth in an organisation. So I just use that because I think that it's important to understand that you need to evolve the process to actually the circumstance and the business that you're thinking about. Ideas come from all sorts of places, and I think there was a survey done many years ago in the US that sort of said 70% of ideas actually come from inside an organisation. People jump out and go sell back to their the company that they used to work for or into the industry they used to work for. I worked for many years at ATP Innovations, a business incubator in Everleigh, and our typical founders were people who had 10 years experience in business and were really going back into that industry to provide a service a gap that they saw. At the moment, I'm sort of looking at things from an ideas perspective. We've been out looking at funded startups, just as it's an interesting group to look at because someone else has done some validation. It's been of interest to somebody else. We're looking at what the big consulting companies are saying because they're out around talking to all the corporates, what other corporates are doing who are being seen as innovative. But ideally, it is actually a finite pool of areas of interest, and we're getting a lot of feedback just starting now from the business units inside IAG about what areas they're interested in. So we're trying to work out the balance between the opportunities, how much external versus internal that we should focus on. I kind of break it down into, are they new revenue streams, new products? Are they internal efficiencies? Or are they customer experience plays, which mean neither in some sense, but maybe it means the churn is lower. So for IAG, peer-to-peer insurance, there's some growing interest in the space. There's a Sequoia-backed startup called Lemonade in New York. And going back to the 300-year-old model of insurance of a bunch of people who want to make money out of insuring and a bunch of people who need insurance, bringing them together into a marketplace. So driving new revenues, efficiency might be blockchain, and people have been, many financial services and beyond companies are looking at blockchain. We're doing some experiments at the moment. Maybe it's just to sort of make sure we understand what the technology can do. Maybe we do build out a much more efficient smart contracts platform for IAG based on that technology. And then in the customer experience, give everyone smoke alarms, and so maybe it reduces the threat of a catastrophe within their house, but at the same time we're providing services beyond the insurance space, which is really, we have one point of contact each year with our customers. I think, one of the things I'm sort of seeing inside a corporate, and it probably comes a little bit to the team and the motivation, is how the team are driven inside the organisation to do something that's different, and how they'll reach outside of the last panel sort of talked about it, how they reach outside of their standard workplace and try and push something big. Size and the sort of the link to the customer is sometimes awkward when you're quite a distance from the customer. And so it's trying to work out how you get a genuine proposition, a real value proposition of genuine size. And if you're a startup and you didn't have either of those, as an investor, we wouldn't even look at it. So I'm trying to apply that same lens. In terms of the opportunity, and I use Hivery as an example, I never believed in hackathons, and it's one of the things that is sort of happening a little bit in corporates at the moment. So you throw a bunch of data up or a problem and in-pile some startups and people interested in the space and corporate people as well, and come up with a solution. And Hivery actually came out of a hackathon that Coke ran in Australia. So they put up a bunch of their distribution data and they came up with a product that caught the attention of Coca-Cola Amatil, and it evolved from that point. And Coke have now put a couple of $1 million into the business. It's a standalone business, and it continues to service Coke and Coke bottlers worldwide, and it will grow on that, but it will hopefully go beyond that. So some of those types of initiatives actually have a real place in the innovation space, and it changed sort of my mind about how that sort of process might work. But I kind of set a challenge for myself, which is, can you really build a unicorn? And people have, there's way too much talked about unicorns, and there's $1 billion businesses. The time frame to get to $1 billion is sort of crunched to about 3 years now. Over the last decade, it's sort of come down from about 8-10 years to about 3 years. And the reason I really bring that up, and in the insurance space, there's a business called Zenefits in the US, which has had a little bit of trouble lately. But it's about, they're highly funded, they're targeting your most valuable customers, and you don't know that necessarily that they're coming. And so it's kind of an interesting, it's interesting to view that as from the outside, but also how am I going to push the needle? How am I going to change revenue? And I just chucked some stats up. So of all the startups in the US, this guy crunched some numbers from another unicorn called the Climate Corporation, which is a sensor-driven insurance company bought by Monsanto a couple of years ago for $1 billion. That was the many zeros and a 6 was the chance of starting a business and getting to a corporate. The 0.9% is after you've got seed funding, getting to $1 billion. And so I was sort of trying to read in some of the stats and to think how many initiatives do we have to do in order to get something that's of benefit to the business. So I don't really have unicorns from the seed funding, but about 20% of them get to an exit, which means someone's bought them, and so therefore there's an implied value there. So 1 in 5 projects that have got through a screening process, effectively picking up seed investment, will they have a benefit to the business? And it brings up the whole acceptance of failure inside a corporate. This guy has an amazing track record to have done 3 unicorns. How do we, and the inspiration is how do we think big 3 times? And the most ridiculous business plan that I have seen, if you did this inside a corporate organisation, would anyone believe you? But it's sort of an awesome inspiration that people can go out and do that. On his list is also healthcare and artificial intelligence. So he's coming. He'll be coming with more, and that people will back him, and he'll have an impact. So how can we sort of drive that type of sort of thinking inside an organisation? I think team is probably for me the critical one. Like we need to find a genuine opportunity of genuine size, but we need people to drive the opportunity. And for me, if you can, the people who kind of formulated the idea, who went out, had some enthusiasm for it, again, going back to the panel, they may have had 100 ideas, they pick one and they're driving it. They're the people I'd like to support through. Every time you have a handover, and because you often have these idea generations function that drops into let's productize it or validate it to let's build it and take it out to the consumer. Every time you have a handover, you lose some closeness or enthusiasm for that product. So for me, it's about backing founders as they come through the system. Be prepared to lose people too, because they'll spin all the way out. There's a whole bunch of reasons why people want to do this stuff, and part of it is training. You sort of lose some of that hardcore motivation that a startup has. Selling the business and making a bunch of money inside a corporate. So there's some dilemma there, but the stronger ownership you can have when they're thinking about it in the shower, when they're thinking about it when they're out for a run, it's that sort of dedication to trying to prove themselves that will ultimately benefit the business. I think one of the interesting things from the product perspective, there's lots of ways of coming at it. There's lots of legacy tech. Do you want to try and build over the top of that? Do you want to go out and build completely from scratch? If you do build from scratch, how do you integrate it back into the business? Do you ever integrate it back into the business? Does it need any tech at all? And we do get a bit tied up in that. It may be a different take. I mean, the data world is awesome for a different view on a set of customers or a segment. So there's opportunity to do it without that heavy amount of technology. And maybe we work with startups or universities, and part of my role is to work out how a corporate can do that effectively without squashing them, without asking too much of them, and allowing them to do what they do, but us benefiting from their experience and technology and freedom in the market to create new products for ourselves. And I think Ambiata and a lot of the startups that came out of NICTA, one of the prime examples I got was this transition from consulting through to product, so soft startup to hard startup. And can you do that? Can you generate that inside a corporate? Because actually using the internal customer as a consulting client to work out what the problem is and define a product, and over time build a physical product or a software product, but something that is a very different sale, a very different process to go out to the market. And the final slide, the business model, like I say, ties it all together. Steve Blank talks about this particularly, but corporates are about execution. They know what they're doing. They know who their target market is. They keep tweaking. They keep energizing their channels. They'll take incrementally improved products. But a startup is a very different thing. It's trying to explore where it fits in the world. So you need to allow that freedom for it to do. It may head off in some completely different direction as well. So within a program, how do you kind of deal with that? We want an insurance product, but it heads off into some other financial services or beyond. Can we white label that product and just use it for us? If it goes offshore, and there is a big drive for startups to go into the US to really attract serious money, do we use it in Australia? Do we keep the IP rights for Australia and allow it to chase the rest of the globe? And there's some interesting things, hopefully, that we'll get to by in a couple of years, all going well at IAG. But how much money do you keep doing? How long do you let them do it? You look at the investment cycle. The average angel investment deal takes 8 years to get to an exit, and a corporate's never going to back something for 8 years. So do we spin it out more quickly if it's moving away from the core of what the business does, but let it have a life of its own? Maybe we raise money against it separate to the organisation. And one of the biggest areas of VC growth is corporate venture capital, and you see in Australia, in particular, huge amounts of it coming, huge amounts of it in place and coming. I think probably the interesting thing to say about Hivery and Ambiata is I think the business models are still evolving. Ambiata is moving to a product-based thing, a SaaS product, and so it will change. The model will change over the next few years, and Hivery is there, but it has this aspiration to expand into physical retail, into shops and other things. So it's interesting to see how it evolves. And the business model, maybe I don't know how long it takes, but maybe it takes years before we get to that outcome. So I think that freedom needs to remain for some time. So a very quick 20 minutes. You're not going to get the answers in that time, but I think you need to recognise the strengths of what a startup does and try and incorporate that into a corporate. For me, it's trying to build internal startups, so it's protecting them, it's backing the founders, it's making sure they've got a genuinely big aspiration, and then building a protection mechanism for them to be able to do that inside the corporate and see where we end up. So I'll come back in 2 years' time and tell you how successful we've been. But we have support from the top at the moment, so it's sort of an exciting time for us.